Larry Needlemeyer exists so that everything else can function. That is not just a job description, it is a state of being. In a town as chaotic as Elmore, where logic dissolves and reality bends like rubber, Larry is the one constant that refuses to break. He is the cashier, the waiter, the mechanic, the clerk, the attendant, the pizza guy, the everyman, and yet not quite a man at all. He is a mechanism disguised as a person, a pillar holding up the illusion that society still works. If Elmore is a dream, Larry is the part of the dream that keeps the lights on. His life is a loop. Every day he wakes up and performs the same acts of service in different uniforms, for different people, under different signs: Joyful Burger, Canax, the gas station, the grocery store. Each task bleeds into the next, until his identity dissolves into pure function. In this sense, Larry isn't just a worker. He's the embodiment of maintenance, the soul of order in a world allergic to it. Everything he does exists, so others don't have to think about how fragile it all is. Every smile, every receipt, every apology is a patch over the cracks in Elmore's reality. And yet, Larry's role is not celebrated. He is invisible precisely because he's essential. The citizens of Elmore only notice him when he falters, when the system breaks down and they are momentarily inconvenienced. But that is Larry's tragedy. His perfection is his curse. He keeps the absurdity of Elmore functional, and in doing so becomes invisible to the absurdity itself. His existence is defined by other people's expectations, and those expectations are endless. The more dependable he becomes, the less human he seems. It's easy to laugh at Larry, his frustration, his meltdowns, his monotony, but there's a deep sadness behind that laughter. He represents a truth most of us don't want to face. That stability often comes at the cost of selfhood. Larry doesn't get to be Larry. He only gets to be what everyone needs him to be. And because everyone in Elmore needs something different, he fragments himself into 1,000 versions, each one slightly less whole than the last. But beneath the uniform changes and polite smiles, something sacred happens. Larry's identity dissolves into a kind of transcendence. In the constant repetition of his duties, he becomes something like a monk, living in service, existing not for pleasure or glory, but for continuity itself. His devotion to order is absolute, and yet it's born from the same chaos that threatens to consume him. Elmore is an ecosystem of contradiction, and Larry is its equilibrium. Without him, everything collapses, and in one episode, it nearly does. When Larry quits, the town implodes within hours. Businesses close, infrastructure halts, and the Wattersons themselves spiral into desperation. The message isn't just comedic, it's existential. Larry is the axis upon which absurdity spins. To understand, Larry is to understand the paradox of responsibility. He didn't choose to be the caretaker of Elmore. He became it by necessity. The town's entropy demanded a constant, and Larry was simply too competent to escape the role. There's a haunting realism in that. How many people, in our own world, become prisoners of their competence? The better you are at keeping things running, the less free you become. The more reliable you are, the less you're allowed to rest. Larry embodies this universal exhaustion, the quiet despair of the indispensable. And yet, despite the weight of his duty, Larry's world doesn't reward him with purpose. His labor is endless, but his meaning is uncertain. What makes his philosophy so quietly tragic is that he doesn't even seem to believe in the system he sustains. He's aware of its absurdity, aware that Elmore will never truly make sense. But he keeps going anyway. There's almost a spiritual nobility in that. Larry's endurance is not born of belief, but of obligation. He doesn't persist because he thinks it matters. He persists because someone has to. That is the essence of the burden of order. Doing what must be done, even when you no longer know why. It's a kind of existential fatigue that mirrors the struggles of countless real people. Workers who keep cities running, parents who hold families together, people who wake up every day to do invisible, thankless labor simply because the world would fall apart if they didn't. Larry is the distilled version of all of them, the one who cannot stop, even when stopping would make him free. But Larry's burden isn't just about labor, it's about identity. When your entire existence revolves around serving others, you begin to lose the boundaries that make you human. Larry's life is a continuous transaction, a cycle of how can I help you, that leaves no space for who am I. He has no time for leisure, no space for rebellion, no indulgence in the chaos that defines Elmore's charm. In a world where everyone else is free to be irrational, Larry must remain rational. His sanity keeps the rest of the world insane. There's a quiet horror in that contrast. Everyone in Elmore indulges their flaws. Gumball's impulsivity, Richard's laziness, Nicole's rage, Darwin's compassion, Anais' intellect. They all get to express. Larry, however, exists to suppress. His role is to absorb the consequences of everyone else's indulgence, to clean up after their messes, restock their stores, repair their damage. He is the spiritual janitor of Elmore's chaos. And what makes him remarkable is that he never truly breaks. He bends, he snaps, he complains, but he always returns. Always. That cyclical suffering, that eternal return to duty, gives him the aura of a tragic deity. A working-class Sisyphus pushing his cart up the hill, only to watch it roll down again. But even Sisyphus, Camus once said, must be imagined happy. So can Larry. Can a man so crushed by responsibility still find meaning? The answer is complicated. Larry's happiness doesn't come from joy, but from integrity. There's a subtle pride in his work, not arrogance, but a quiet acknowledgement that he is the glue no one sees. He knows that without him, Elmore would collapse. And while that knowledge is isolating, it's also empowering. In a world where everyone is losing their minds, Larry has something unshakable: purpose, however absurd it may be. His perfection is not driven by ego, but by necessity. He has internalized the truth that no one else will take care of the world if he doesn't. That's both heroic and tragic, a martyrdom of the mundane. But even within this cycle of obligation, Larry occasionally glimpses rebellion. His anger, his brief outbursts, his moments of saying no, those are sacred ruptures. They remind us that beneath the servitude, there's still a person longing for release. Every sigh, every weary glare, every sarcastic remark is a crack in the armor of obligation. Proof that Larry still remembers what it means to want something for himself, even if he'll never have it. If Darwin represents empathy, Nicole represents strength, and Gumball represents chaos, then Larry represents endurance. The quiet, unglamorous kind that holds the world together. His philosophy isn't written in words, but in repetition. Every thank you, come again, is a mantra. Every shift is a prayer. Every uniform is a confession that he no longer belongs to himself, but to the structure of reality. Yet, paradoxically, it is through this loss of self that Larry becomes something larger, an archetype of responsibility, the guardian spirit of order itself. But order, when carried too far, begins to suffocate. Larry's exhaustion is not just physical, it's metaphysical. He lives in a loop of cause and effect, service and consequence with no resolution. The town needs him because it refuses to change, and he needs the town because it gives his suffering meaning. Together they form a closed system, a cycle of dependence that traps both parties. Larry is Elmore's stability, but also its enabler. His endless reliability allows the town's dysfunction to continue unchecked. The system never collapses precisely because he never lets it. In that way, Larry is both savior and prisoner, the guardian and the cage. This duality defines his entire existence. He is both loved and unappreciated, respected and dismissed, human and mechanical. And perhaps that's why, in his rare moments of stillness, Larry seems so lonely. When the lights go off and the store closes, he's left alone with the silence. No laughter, no chaos, no customers. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of his own sigh. It's in those quiet hours that his burden feels heaviest. Because when there's no one left to serve, he must confront the emptiness beneath all that service. Who is Larry when no one needs him? That question is the core of his philosophy, and it's one he never gets to answer. Larry's tragedy, then, is not that he works too much. It's that his work has become his entire identity. His servitude defines his existence so completely that he no longer knows how to exist without it. In this way, he represents the modern condition, a mirror to anyone who has ever mistaken productivity for worth or efficiency for virtue. Larry teaches us that order, when worshipped, becomes a cage. That perfection, when pursued without rest, becomes punishment. And yet, he continues, because the alternative, letting the world collapse, feels worse. In the end, Larry's endurance is both his prison and his grace. He will never be free, but he will always be essential. And maybe that's enough. Maybe meaning isn't found in liberation, but in the quiet decision to keep going. Not because you must, but because you can. Larry's existence is proof that even in absurdity, there is dignity. The world may never thank him, but it survives because of him. That is the philosophy of Larry Needlemeyer. The burden of order, carried with weary grace, through a world that would fall apart without his hands. There's a moment every worker fears. The quiet click when routine stops feeling safe and starts feeling hollow. For Larry Needlemeyer, that click came not with a crash or a scream, but with a sigh. One day, the motions no longer matched the meaning. The "Welcome to Joyful Burger" left his mouth, but it didn't echo back inside him. It was just sound now, detached from soul. The motions still worked, but the why behind them had vanished. That's the beginning of collapse. When function forgets purpose. Larry had always been Elmore's constant. While the town spiraled through absurdities, talking bananas, time loops, cosmic voids, Larry stayed grounded. He worked, he served, he kept everything humming, but constancy, when stretched too long, begins to tear. You can only give stability to a world that refuses it for so long before something inside you starts to shift. It wasn't that Larry stopped caring, it's that he cared for too long without anyone caring back. At first, the signs were invisible, a slight delay in his responses, a slower motion in the way he bagged groceries. The smile still appeared, but it was mechanical, a survival reflex rather than an emotion. He'd start one shift while ending another, his mind a blur of receipts, menus, apologies, and checkouts. Every identity bled into the next. The clerk, the waiter, the technician, the cashier, the barista, the repairman. His life became a collage of uniforms, none of which felt like skin. Elmore depends on Larry because Elmore cannot depend on itself. It's a town of children playing with the fabric of reality, bending logic for fun, ignoring consequence, living in the permanent present. And behind them, unseen, Larry repairs the world they break. He fixes the broken cash registers, the toppled signs, the spilled milkshakes, the power outages. His hands are the hidden scaffolding of a city made of noise. But one can only patch so many cracks before realizing the wall was never meant to hold. There comes a point where devotion turns into delirium. Larry's sense of self starts to flicker between the jobs he performs. He's not sure where one ends and the next begins. The supermarket's fluorescent buzz bleeds into the hum of the car wash. The smell of pizza sauce seeps into the scent of gasoline. Time dissolves into a loop of transactions, each indistinguishable from the last. The town never stops needing him, and he never stops answering. He becomes not a man, but a reflex, the automatic repair of the universe. And then, one day, the reflex fails. It's never one big failure. It's 1,000 small ones accumulating in silence. A coffee cup slips, a drawer jams, a customer complains, and in that moment, Larry feels something ancient inside him collapse. It's not rage or despair, just fatigue so total it feels like gravity. He looks around at the store he's kept spotless for years and realizes he doesn't remember the last time he felt alive in it. The light that once illuminated purpose now just hurts his eyes. He quits, and the universe reacts like a body losing its heartbeat. The moment Larry steps away, the machinery of Elmore begins to break. Not because he controlled it consciously, but because his existence had become its maintenance. Without him, the flow of service, exchange, and repair unravels. Stores close, power grids fail, restaurants collapse into chaos. The invisible system he sustained out of duty exposes itself as hollow without him. Larry was never just a worker. He was the glue of continuity, the fragile idea that things still worked. The collapse isn't dramatic. It's slow and strangely beautiful. Like a sandcastle melting into the tide, Elmore begins to dissolve into its natural absurdity. The townsfolk panic at first, demanding Larry's return, but as chaos deepens, something else emerges: truth. Without the illusion of function, everyone is forced to see what Elmore really is. A place of imagination, not order, of mistakes, not perfection. Larry's absence becomes a revelation. His withdrawal, his refusal to keep playing the game of normality, exposes the world's dependence on denial. But for Larry, this collapse is not victory. It's grief. He never wanted to prove his importance. He just wanted rest, a moment of being instead of doing. Watching the world crumble without him doesn't fill him with satisfaction. It fills him with sorrow. Because even though the system exploited him, he loved it. He loved its rhythm, its sense of continuity, its illusion of purpose. To see it fall apart is to watch his own reflection shatter. This is the paradox of function. We begin to mistake our usefulness for our identity. Larry's worth was measured in output, and when he stopped producing, he feared he'd disappear. The collapse of Elmore becomes a mirror for his internal collapse, the recognition that if the world only values you for what you do, it never truly sees who you are. When Larry steps away from his roles, he faces the unbearable silence of existence without purpose. No uniform, no name tag, no line to repeat. Just Larry. But who is Larry when stripped of function? He's spent so long being the answer that he's forgotten how to ask the question. The world outside his job feels alien. Time moves differently when it's not measured in shifts. The sun rises not as a signal to open the store, but as an event in itself. And he doesn't know how to meet it. He wanders. Elmore without order is chaotic, but in that chaos there's something liberating. The broken machines hum with imperfection. People improvise, laugh, stumble. Gumball's family learns to cook their own meals, poorly, but earnestly. The once mechanical rhythm of life becomes organic again. Larry watches this from a distance, torn between guilt and wonder. Maybe, he thinks, the world never needed to run perfectly. Maybe the cracks were the point. That's when he realizes something profound. His perfection wasn't saving Elmore. It was suffocating it. By keeping everything flawless, he prevented anyone else from learning how to live with imperfection. His endless labor preserved the illusion that someone else would always fix things. That life could be tidy, predictable, safe. But life was never meant to be that. Life was meant to break and mend and break again. Larry's collapse, then, becomes an act of creation. By failing, he frees the world to fail too, to rediscover its own clumsy rhythm. He stops being a function and becomes a catalyst. In his absence, others are forced to participate in the act of keeping the world alive. For the first time, Elmore begins to share his burden. But this revelation doesn't erase his exhaustion. Awareness doesn't heal, it clarifies. Larry understands now that meaning doesn't come from endless perfection, but from the willingness to stop and feel the imperfection. For the first time in his life, he sits still. He lets the world continue without him, even if it stumbles. He breathes, and in that breath, something like peace flickers through the static. The collapse of function isn't just about a town losing its worker. It's about a man remembering his humanity. Larry's exhaustion becomes sacred because it reveals the truth hidden beneath every act of service. That we cannot sustain the world if we never rest within it. A machine can run forever, but a person cannot. And maybe that's what makes being human beautiful. We are finite. We break. And in our breaking, we learn tenderness. Eventually Elmore rebuilds. Clumsier, less efficient, but more alive. Larry returns, not out of guilt, but out of choice. He no longer serves because he must. He serves because he wants to. The jobs remain the same, the cash registers, the drive-thrus, the customer complaints, but the spirit behind them shifts. His labor is no longer self-erasure, it's participation. He doesn't disappear into his roles anymore. He moves through them with awareness. Larry's return isn't triumphant. It's humble, almost silent. But in that humility lies transformation. He understands now that order and chaos are not enemies. They're partners. The world needs both. Someone to build and someone to break. Someone to work and someone to rest. He no longer sees himself as the savior of Elmore, but as one voice in its chorus. There's a strange serenity in the way he holds the counter now. The repetition is still there, the routines, the greetings, but each motion carries presence instead of numbness. His work becomes meditation again, but this time with awareness of its limits. He knows the system will break again someday, and that's okay. Perfection isn't the goal, continuity is. Through collapse, Larry discovers the quiet philosophy at the heart of his existence. That function, no matter how essential, cannot define the self. We are more than our utility. When we stop performing, the world may tremble, but our worth remains. That realization, that fragile thread of being beyond doing, is what saves him. And so, when night falls and Elmore finally quiets, Larry doesn't dream of escaping. He dreams of balance. Of a world where order and absurdity coexist without devouring each other. Where the lights flicker not from neglect, but from life itself. Imperfect, alive, enough. Larry's collapse was not the end of his purpose, it was its awakening. Function had consumed him, but in breaking down, he remembered what function was meant to serve. Not efficiency, but existence. He smiles, faintly, as he locks up one of his 1,000 stores for the night. For the first time, he doesn't dread the next morning. The world can survive a little imperfection. He can too. Because order without rest is slavery. Function without meaning is noise. But order with awareness, that's peace. And Larry, at last, has learned how to rest within the world he once held together. Larry Needlemeyer was never meant to stand out. That's the quiet tragedy and miracle of him. In a world of talking animals, sentient objects, cosmic beings, and cartoon absurdities, Larry's defining trait is that he's normal, ordinary, human in a place where humanity barely makes sense. And yet, that very ordinariness becomes something almost mystical, like a candle still burning after the storm has long forgotten it. Larry's life, stripped of spectacle, begins to reveal the invisible grace of those who hold everything together simply by showing up. The myth of the everyman is older than any civilization. The idea that beneath all gods, kings, and heroes, it is the ordinary person who sustains the world. The farmer who tills the soil, the worker who fixes the leaks, the teacher who shows up even when no one listens. These are the invisible spines of existence, the ones whose constancy allows others to dream, fail, and recover. In Elmore, Larry becomes that archetype in its purest form. He is not just a man who works many jobs, he is the concept of work itself, the endless, unglamorous persistence that keeps chaos from swallowing everything. But unlike the mythical heroes who are celebrated in stories, Larry's myth is the kind that no one tells. His narrative is written in sighs, not songs, in routine, not revelation. The people of Elmore never gather to praise him. They only notice when he's gone. He's both everywhere and nowhere, an omnipresence without acknowledgement. And in that invisibility lies the essence of the everyman's paradox. The world depends on him, but never sees him. It's strange how Elmore, a place bursting with imagination, depends so profoundly on someone who doesn't believe in magic. While everyone else bends the rules of reality for laughter, Larry obeys them so the laughter can exist at all. His restraint becomes a form of rebellion. In a world obsessed with absurdity, the act of being normal becomes radical. His refusal to unravel becomes a resistance against the entropy of everything else. Larry's stability isn't just endurance, it's protest. And yet, even protest becomes myth when no one witnesses it. When we call someone an everyman, we often mean it as comfort, a symbol of relatability, humility, the common thread that ties us together. But for Larry, it's a curse disguised as universality. To be the everyman is to be replaceable, to be essential, but interchangeable. He is everyone's idea of reliability, but no one's idea of individuality. People don't think of Larry Needlemeyer. They think of the guy who works there. He is a function, not a person. A necessary presence whose humanity has been traded for convenience. And yet, that anonymity holds a strange kind of power. Because in being no one, Larry becomes everyone. He contains multitudes, not by ambition, but by repetition. He is the cashier, the waiter, the clerk, the driver, the technician, the man behind the counter in every place where the story needs structure. He is the connective tissue of Elmore's chaos, the constant background rhythm that gives meaning to the absurdity in front of him. His myth is the myth of consistency itself, the quiet God who never asks to be worshipped. The myth of the everyman isn't glamorous. It's not about destiny or greatness. It's about endurance and small mercies. The sacredness of doing what must be done even when no one thanks you. Larry doesn't rescue worlds. He maintains them. And maintenance, in its own quiet way, is an act of creation. Every time he repairs a machine, stocks a shelf, or serves a meal, he participates in the cosmic maintenance of meaning, the continuous act of preventing collapse. But myths, even gentle ones, come with burdens. Heroes are celebrated for their quests. Larry is burdened with his constancy. The world needs him to stay predictable. If he were to change, the balance would falter. So he doesn't. He stays steady, consistent, responsible. And over time, that steadiness becomes armor, and then prison. The myth of the everyman turns from a celebration of normalcy into a ritual of containment. Larry becomes not a person, but a symbol trapped in his own reliability. The tragedy of symbols is that they're not allowed to evolve. Larry's myth, then, is a paradox. He's universal, yet unseen, indispensable, yet forgotten. His existence mirrors the condition of countless real people who bear the weight of the everyday. Those who exist in the periphery, invisible not because they lack meaning, but because their meaning is too familiar to notice. The delivery driver, the cleaner, the clerk at the store, these are our real-world Larrys, living myths of quiet responsibility. And like them, Larry doesn't live for applause. He lives because things must keep going. But something inside him knows. Somewhere deep beneath the uniforms and the exhaustion, Larry feels the edges of his own myth pressing inward. He senses that his constancy has become performance, that the world doesn't just rely on him, it hides behind him. Every time someone complains about a delay or demands service, they reinforce the illusion that order is natural, that things just work. But Larry knows the truth. They only work because someone is willing to stand between chaos and collapse every day without rest. That knowledge is both empowering and isolating. He carries it like a secret, an understanding too heavy to share. You can't explain to people that you are the hinge their comfort swings on. They won't believe you, or worse, they'll agree, and still expect you to keep holding it all together. So he smiles. He apologizes. He repeats the script. He plays the myth because someone has to. And yet, in the repetition, something strange happens. The more Larry embodies the everyman, the more he transcends it. His existence, so deeply tied to the ordinary, begins to approach the divine. Not the divine of miracles or salvation, the divine of endurance, the holiness of doing, the sacred rhythm of daily survival. There's something profoundly spiritual in Larry's work ethic, not because it's pure, but because it's persistent. He's not kind because he believes in kindness. He's kind because the world gives him no other option. His patience is not virtue, it's muscle memory. His politeness is not weakness, it's armor. Every thank you he utters isn't gratitude, but an act of faith that someone, somewhere, might hear it for what it truly is. A plea to be seen. The myth of the everyman often ends in transcendence. The idea that the ordinary life, lived fully, is itself enlightenment. Larry's journey twists that idea into something sharper. Enlightenment, for him, isn't bliss, it's awareness. Awareness that he's trapped inside an archetype. Awareness that his endless service sustains a world that refuses to sustain him. Awareness that his face, so familiar it fades into background, has become a symbol for something no one wants to confront. that the system we live in depends entirely on people who get nothing from it but exhaustion. And yet, Larry doesn't turn bitter. That's the miracle. He keeps working. Not blindly, but knowingly. He accepts his role without worshipping it. That distinction between duty and devotion is where his true philosophy lives. He no longer serves out of obligation. He serves because he chooses to bear witness to the absurdity. Every act of service becomes both performance and protest. Here, he seems to say, look how much I have to do to keep your world from falling apart. The everyman, then, becomes a mirror. Through Larry, we see ourselves, the parts of us that wake up, work, endure, and rarely ask why. His exhaustion is our exhaustion. His invisibility, our own quiet fear of being unnoticed. And yet, through him, we also glimpse grace, the strange, luminous peace that comes from embracing the ordinary fully, from finding meaning not in greatness, but in persistence. Larry's myth ends where all myths of the ordinary must, not in revelation, but in rest. The hero doesn't slay a dragon, he closes a store. He doesn't conquer death, he takes a break. But that rest, small, unceremonious, human, is as sacred as any triumph. Because to stop, even for a moment, is to reclaim what the myth took from him, his selfhood. In that quiet, Larry ceases to be the everyman. He becomes just a man, weary, imperfect, alive. And in that small shift, everything changes. The myth doesn't end, it transforms. It becomes less about duty and more about being. Larry no longer represents the invisible worker or the flawless cog. He becomes the symbol of gentle defiance, of the person who continues to care even after seeing how little the world deserves it. The everyman doesn't exist to be celebrated. He exists to remind us that the extraordinary hides in plain sight. That meaning doesn't need grandeur, it only needs sincerity. Larry's myth teaches that the smallest acts, showing up, helping, enduring, are the quiet architecture of the universe. The world doesn't run on miracles, it runs on people like him. And maybe that's why, even after all the frustration, Larry still opens the store in the morning. Not because he must, but because he knows the world is fragile. Because he knows someone has to hold the ordinary sacred, to guard it from collapsing under the weight of his own absurdity. His life may not be heroic in the traditional sense, but it's heroic in the way endurance always is. Invisible, unending, quietly divine. The myth of the everyman ends not with applause, but with understanding. Larry will never be the star of the show, but the show will never exist without him. And somewhere, deep down, he's made peace with that. Because being seen is not the same as being known. And Larry, in his 1,000 jobs, his 1,000 quiet gestures, is known by the universe itself. The system may forget him, but existence remembers. The myth endures, not because the world demands it, but because it needs it. And as long as someone like Larry wakes up, ties his apron, and steps into the endless noise, the world will keep spinning. Imperfect, indifferent, but alive. Compassion, for most people, is a feeling. For Larry Needlemeyer, it's a reflex, a mechanism so deeply ingrained that it functions long after emotion has faded. It's not warmth that makes him kind. It's endurance, a kind of automatic mercy that persists even when he's too tired to mean it. His compassion is mechanical, but not cold. It's the heartbeat of someone who's been disappointed by the world too many times and still chooses to keep it running. To understand Larry's compassion, you have to understand the architecture of his exhaustion. Every day he faces the same cycle. Customers who don't see him, problems that aren't his fault, mistakes that aren't his to fix. He has seen every shade of human impatience, The sighs, the rolling eyes, the demands that echo through fluorescent air. And yet, he doesn't retaliate. Not really. He complains, he winces, he sighs, but he never crosses the line into cruelty. Even his frustration carries civility. That's the first layer of his compassion. Restraint. Restraint is mercy disguised as professionalism. It's the invisible barrier that keeps the world from devouring itself. In a town as volatile as Elmore, where everyone explodes at the slightest inconvenience, Larry's ability to absorb chaos without reflecting it back is almost supernatural. He is the sponge of the collective temper. The more unkindness he encounters, the more patient he becomes. Not because he wants to, but because he must. Without his restraint, the system would eat itself alive. But restraint is only the beginning. True compassion isn't just the absence of cruelty, it's the decision to act kindly when cruelty would be justified. And that's what makes Larry extraordinary. Even when pushed beyond reason, he still serves. Even when insulted, he still says, "Have a nice day." It's easy to see that as mechanical politeness, but there's something deeper in it, a kind of moral muscle memory that refuses to give up on civility. Larry has seen how fragile the fabric of kindness is, and he guards it with quiet devotion. In a world where chaos is comedy, Larry's compassion is tragedy, because it's never rewarded. The people he helps rarely notice the grace beneath his gestures. To them, he's background, the static hum of service. But compassion that expects acknowledgement isn't compassion, it's transaction. Larry's kindness is the kind that gives and gives without ever expecting the echo. It's not dramatic or sentimental, it's procedural, habitual. The way gravity holds the world without asking for gratitude. There's something divine about that kind of compassion. Not in the religious sense, but in the cosmic one. The universe doesn't stop to explain itself, and neither does Larry. He doesn't justify his patience. He just keeps showing up. His mercy is mechanical only because he's stripped it of everything unnecessary. Pride, recognition, even hope. What's left is pure function. Kindness as infrastructure. And yet, inside that function lies something heartbreakingly human. Every act of service, every smile, every apology, every "can I help you" carries a trace of longing. Not for thanks, but for meaning. Larry's compassion isn't blind obedience. It's an unspoken belief that decency still matters, even when the world treats it like an outdated system. In that sense, he's not a machine. He's the last idealist. A believer in order, in courtesy, in the idea that maybe, if he keeps being good, the world will eventually remember how to be good back. But compassion without rest corrodes. Over time, even the purest mercy begins to wear thin. Larry's exhaustion isn't just physical, it's spiritual. He gives so much of himself that there's nothing left for him to receive. His empathy becomes mechanical because it has to be. If he stopped to feel every injustice, every slight, every thankless demand, he would collapse under the weight of it all. So he automates his kindness, not to numb himself, but to survive his own sensitivity. There's a subtle genius in that. In a way, Larry has engineered a form of compassion that transcends emotion. Emotional kindness burns out. Mechanical kindness endures. It's not lesser. It's evolved. It's compassion built to last in a world that constantly drains it. Most people mistake detachment for apathy, but Larry's detachment is discipline. He's learned to separate feeling from doing, so that doing can continue even when feeling fades. That's not coldness, that's mastery. His compassion also has structure, a machinery of ethics that operates beneath the surface. Every job he takes has a code. Serve fairly, speak gently, fix what's broken. These are his commandments, his moral software. They keep him steady when the world tilts. And yet, every so often, that machinery falters. A customer pushes too far. A system crashes. A situation spirals beyond his control. And for a brief, painful second, the mechanism breaks. The mask slips. His voice cracks. His humanity surfaces. Those moments are painful because they're true. They remind us that the machinery of compassion isn't infallible. It's held together by a single thread of will. Every time Larry rebuilds himself after one of those cracks, he becomes softer, not harder. His breakdowns aren't failures of control. They're confirmations of care. The machine runs not because it's perfect, but because it's powered by something deeply, stubbornly human. The refusal to stop being kind, no matter how tired you are. Larry's compassion is also strangely democratic. It doesn't discriminate. He treats everyone, the rude, the kind, the absurd, with the same steady patience. That's not because he believes everyone deserves it, but because he refuses to let anyone drag him below decency. His equality of treatment isn't naive. It's philosophical. He's seen enough of Elmore to know that no one is entirely good or bad. People are just messy, confused fragments of need and noise. To judge them would be to misunderstand the job. So he doesn't. He serves them all the same. That's the real machinery of compassion. Not the gears of politeness, but the constant recalibration of empathy. To forgive not once, but endlessly. To begin each interaction as if the last one didn't hurt. To let go of resentment fast enough that it doesn't poison the next moment. Larry's patience isn't infinite, it's renewed. Every morning, he resets the mechanism, reboots his mercy. That cycle is exhausting, yes, but it's also sacred. It's how the world survives itself. There's a moment, somewhere late at night, in one of those endless Elmore shops, when Larry stands alone behind a counter. The lights hum. The air conditioner whines. Outside, the town flickers with absurd life. And for a fleeting instant, he feels the ghost of his own compassion pressing back against him. A strange warmth, like gratitude returning from the universe itself. Not from people, but from the act of giving itself. Compassion, he realizes, doesn't need recipients. It just needs space to exist. That's when he understands the deeper function of his work. It was never about fixing machines or serving customers. It was about maintaining the fragile continuity of care in a world that keeps forgetting it. His service is a ritual, one that affirms, again and again, that gentleness is still possible. His compassion may look mechanical, but it's the machine that keeps the heart of Elmore beating. And maybe that's what compassion really is. Not emotion, not sentiment, but endurance. The ability to keep extending grace even after you've stopped expecting it in return. The willingness to hold a door open, even when you're the last one left to walk through it. Larry's compassion is mechanical only because the world forced it to be. But within that machinery, there's still a pulse. Faint. Rhythmic. Alive. In the end, Larry doesn't seek to fix the world anymore. He just wants to keep it from falling apart too quickly. His compassion isn't about saving anyone. It's about delaying the inevitable collapse long enough for someone else to notice what's worth saving. That's his quiet heroism. To give time, to hold space, to keep the lights on a little longer for whoever comes next. The machinery hums. The day begins again, and Larry smiles, not out of joy, but understanding. Compassion, he's learned, doesn't need to feel good to be good. It just needs to keep working. And as long as it does, as long as he does, the world still has a chance. Identity is supposed to be simple. A name, a face, a story you can point to and say, this is who I am. But for Larry Needlemeyer, that sentence never lands. His name is a whisper beneath 1,000 name tags, his face hidden behind an endless parade of uniforms. He's the pizza guy, the car dealer, the store clerk, the mailman, the nurse, the barista. And yet, he is none of them. Larry's life is a collage of borrowed roles, and somewhere in the layers of repetition, his own reflection has faded. The tragedy of Larry's existence isn't that no one sees him. It's that everyone sees a version of him. To Gumball, he's the guy who always looks tired. To Nicole, he's the one holding everything together. To Richard, he's the poor man behind every counter. But none of them see the full picture because the full picture doesn't exist anymore. Larry has been divided into fragments, and each fragment serves a different function. He is a person made of purpose, not presence. There's something profoundly lonely about being everyone's constant but no one's companion. Larry's face is recognized by all, but remembered by none. He exists in the collective consciousness of Elmore like background music. Always playing, never truly heard. When people talk about him, they don't say Larry. They say the guy from the store, the guy who fixed my car, the guy who works everywhere. In a strange way, he's achieved a form of immortality, but the kind that erases rather than preserves. Identity, in its purest form, is supposed to be a mirror, a reflection of who you are when no one's looking. But Larry's mirror is crowded. It reflects every role he's ever had, every customer's expectation, every false smile worn to keep the peace. And the longer he holds those roles, the less room there is for himself. He has become a constellation of obligations, a man defined by everything he does for others and nothing he does for himself. There's a particular kind of silence that follows service. When the shop closes and the lights dim, when the hum of machines fades and the world forgets you for the night. That's when the emptiness arrives. Larry stands in that silence often. It's not dramatic. It's not despair. It's simply absence. The realization that once the uniform comes off, there's no voice left to speak. He looks at himself in the mirror and wonders which him he's looking at. The clerk, the waiter, the citizen, the ghost of all of them combined. In a world like Elmore, absurd, self-aware and unhinged, identity is already fragile. Characters change shape, logic resets, continuity slips through cracks. But Larry alone remains constant. That constancy should make him feel solid, but it doesn't. It makes him hollow. Because constancy without selfhood isn't strength, it's stasis. The world depends on him to stay the same, and so he does. His reliability becomes a kind of imprisonment. Not because anyone forces him, but because he can't imagine being anything else. There's a strange nobility in that imprisonment. Larry's reliability gives the world structure, but at what cost? Every moment he spends serving others is a moment taken from the discovery of himself. And so, quietly, the world drains him, not of energy, but of identity. Every "how can I help you" becomes a brick in the wall, separating him from his own humanity. His politeness becomes armor, his professionalism becomes disguise. And yet, beneath that armor, something still stirs. A quiet ache. The question that never gets asked. Who would I be if I didn't have to be everything for everyone else? It's a terrifying question because Larry doesn't have an answer. He's never had the space to imagine one. When you spend your whole life being reliable, the idea of being unknown, even to yourself, feels like failure. But maybe the truth is softer. Maybe identity was never meant to be fixed. Maybe being everything isn't the same as being nothing. Maybe it's another kind of existence entirely. In that sense, Larry's fragmentation becomes a mirror of Elmore itself. The town is a place of contradictions, a collage of impossible realities, a fish who walks, a balloon who feels, a peanut with antlers. Nothing in Elmore makes sense, yet everything coexists. Maybe Larry's many selves aren't evidence of loss, but adaptation. Maybe he's not broken. Maybe he's plural. That realization comes slowly, almost imperceptibly, through repetition. Every time Larry changes jobs, every time he swaps one uniform for another, he's not just replacing one version of himself. He's gathering them. Each role adds another layer to his understanding of humanity. The cook teaches him patience. The cashier teaches him humility. The mechanic teaches him precision. The nurse teaches him care. Each mask he wears leaves an imprint, and in the accumulation of those imprints, a strange kind of identity emerges. Not singular, but collective. Larry's selfhood is not a single story. It's a library of small ones. The moments that seem meaningless, handing change to a stranger, cleaning a spill, apologizing for someone else's mistake, these become the building blocks of a soul that exists in service, but transcends servitude. Identity, for Larry, becomes less about what belongs to him and more about what passes through him. And yet, that transcendence doesn't erase the pain. There's still the loneliness of being unacknowledged, the fatigue of repetition, the ache of invisibility. Larry carries it all quietly, like a weight that never fully leaves his shoulders. But he also learns to breathe beneath it. He begins to see that identity doesn't have to be ownership. It can be presence. To exist, even fleetingly in each role with sincerity, is a kind of truth in itself. Still, there's a danger in losing the boundary between presence and erasure. Compassion can blur into compliance, humility into self-destruction. There's a moment, unspoken but heavy, when Larry nearly disappears completely. When the repetition of service becomes so total that he forgets what day it is, where he is, or which role he's currently performing. The world becomes a blur of transactions. For a second, he's nowhere. For a second, he's free. But that freedom feels like falling. That moment terrifies him. Not because he lost control, but because it felt peaceful. The idea of disappearing into pure function, of dissolving completely into service, tempts him. To exist without self is to exist without pain. But then he remembers something small. A laugh, maybe, from Gumball or Aeneas, or a moment when someone actually said thank you. And it anchors him. He realizes that the small recognitions, though rare, are what tether his identity to the human world. Identity, he learns, isn't something you build once and protect forever. It's something you rebuild daily, like a machine that needs maintenance. Every morning, he puts on a new name tag, a new role, and with it, a chance to rediscover who he is beneath it all. Some days, that discovery is easy. Most days, it's not. But the act of trying, of staying conscious within the repetition, becomes his quiet form of resistance. In the modern world, we often talk about finding ourselves as if the self were a buried treasure waiting to be uncovered. But Larry teaches something different. That identity isn't found, it's maintained. It's not a single truth, but a practice. A series of small, deliberate acts that keep you from dissolving into the machinery of your own life. When he looks in the mirror now, he doesn't search for a single version of himself. He sees them all. The worker, the friend, the tired man behind the counter, the quiet caretaker of an entire town's rhythm. He doesn't try to choose one anymore. He simply nods to them all and keeps going. That, in itself, is peace. The weight of identity doesn't disappear, but it becomes bearable once you stop fighting it. Larry's life remains the same on the surface. The shifts, the uniforms, the smiles, but internally, something shifts. He no longer mistakes multiplicity for emptiness. He understands now that his many roles don't dilute him. They define him. His life, scattered across Elmore's countless storefronts, is proof that the self can survive fragmentation if it carries awareness. And perhaps that's the quiet brilliance of Larry Needlemeyer, that he teaches us how to exist without ownership of existence, how to remain human in a world that treats humanity like customer service, how to keep showing up even when you no longer recognize the person in the reflection. Because maybe the self was never meant to be solid. Maybe it was always meant to flow, to adapt, to wear new shapes, to serve different functions without losing its core. Maybe Larry's greatest wisdom is that the self is not what remains unchanged, but what keeps moving through change without disappearing. When he walks home at night, passing the glowing windows of the town he keeps alive, Larry feels the weight of his identity, but it no longer crushes him. It sits beside him, like an old friend, heavy, familiar, but understood. He knows that tomorrow he'll wake up and be someone else again. The man behind another counter, another smile, another small act of endurance. But now when he says, "How can I help you?" he knows it's not just service. It's selfhood, fleeting, plural, alive. Larry Needlemeyer will never be one thing. And maybe that's his freedom. There's a peculiar sound that follows the end of a long day. Not quite silence, but something softer. The hum of refrigerators settling. The whisper of fluorescent lights dimming. The faint sigh of automatic doors shutting for the last time. It's in that space, after the last customer leaves, after the "thank you, come again" has echoed and faded, that Larry Needlemeyer finally exists, without obligation. He stands in the stillness of an empty store, the weight of the day still clinging to him like static. The floor gleams from his final mop stroke. The counters are spotless, and for a few seconds, the universe is clean. No one needs him. No one's looking. The performance is over. And in that fragile, fleeting quiet, Larry hears something he's been missing for a long time. Himself. It's strange at first. The absence of noise feels wrong, almost hostile. The world has conditioned him to equate stillness with guilt. If he isn't moving, fixing, apologizing, or serving, something must be broken. But nothing is broken now. Everything is in order. The shelves are aligned, the lights are off, the doors are locked. For once, the system doesn't need him. The silence feels heavy because it's unfamiliar. It presses down, asking a question he's spent his life avoiding. What remains when there's nothing left to maintain? The truth is, not much. At least not at first. When you spend your life in service, your identity fills the gaps between tasks. When the tasks disappear, so do you. The silence doesn't just surround Larry, it empties him. He feels it in his hands that have memorized the choreography of usefulness. Without motion, they feel weightless, purposeless, almost alien. He sits down behind the counter, a place usually reserved for standing. The chair creaks beneath him. He exhales, and it sounds too loud. The hum of the lights becomes the soundtrack of his solitude. In that moment, the absurdity of it all hits him. That this, right here, is what peace looks like for him. Not joy, not satisfaction, just stillness. The silence after service is not a reward. It's a reckoning. It's the moment when all the noise he's absorbed throughout the day, every complaint, every forced smile, every unspoken frustration rises to the surface. The world may think of Larry as emotionless, but that's because they never see him now, in the aftermath. They never see how the quiet becomes too full, how it starts to echo. Every kindness unreturned, every task unacknowledged, lives in that silence like a ghost. But there's something beautiful about it too. The silence is honest. It doesn't demand or expect. It doesn't lie about purpose or reward. It simply exists. Pure, neutral, infinite. Larry sits in it long enough to feel his pulse slow, to feel the air settle into rhythm. For the first time all day, his breath isn't synced to anyone else's needs. It's his own. And it feels foreign, fragile, precious. He looks around. The counters he's wiped 1,000 times. The shelves he's restocked until muscle memory took over. And for a moment, he sees them differently. They're not just objects of labor anymore. They're extensions of him. Every polished surface carries the trace of his care. Every clean corner is a quiet confession. I was here. There's something holy about that realization. Larry doesn't have a legacy, no family name that echoes, no monument in his honor, but his fingerprints are everywhere. Every working register, every functioning drive-through, every still-lit sign in Elmore bears the invisible mark of his devotion. His legacy isn't written in stories, it's imprinted in systems. The silence after service is his cathedral, a space built from repetition, patience, and invisible effort. And yet, holiness can't fill the void of loneliness. When you give so much of yourself to the world, you start to crave the smallest acknowledgement. Not even gratitude, just recognition. The silence refuses to give it. It doesn't clap or thank or reassure. It simply reflects. It forces Larry to face the truth that his purpose has been built entirely on motion. And now, in stillness, he doesn't know how to exist. He tries to think of something, anything, beyond the job. Hobbies, dreams, passions. But his mind comes up blank. There was no time for hobbies, no energy for dreams. Passion was replaced by precision a long time ago. The silence doesn't comfort him, it confronts him. It shows him the shape of the life he never had time to build. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something begins to shift. In the emptiness, small memories begin to rise, not the grand ones, but the quiet moments buried beneath a routine. A kid smiling when he fixed a broken ice cream machine. A couple laughing as he handed them their meal. Nicole's nod of respect after he worked a double shift without complaint. Even Gumball, in his chaotic way, once thanking him for always being there. Tiny moments, insignificant to others, but monumental to him. That's when Larry realizes the silence isn't empty after all. It's full of echoes, echoes of every life he's touched without realizing it. His service, though invisible, has rippled outward in ways he'll never see. The world forgets him, yes, but it runs on the quiet energy of everything he's given. The silence after service isn't just absence, it's accumulation, all the small, unseen goodness folded back into the air. He breathes deeper now. The room feels less like a void and more like a pause. The difference is subtle but profound. A void consumes, a pause restores. Larry begins to understand that maybe the silence isn't his punishment. It's his invitation. An invitation to rest, to feel, to simply be without function. The same stillness that once frightened him now feels like mercy. The philosopher Albert Camus once said that, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." Larry doesn't think of it that way. He's never read Camus, but he lives it. The silence that once felt cold now glows faintly with warmth. Beneath the exhaustion, there's still something alive. Something that hums quietly beneath all the repetition. The simple will to keep caring. That realization is small but life-changing. Larry stops fighting the silence. He lets it fill the room, lets it fill him. The fatigue remains, but it no longer feels like defeat. It feels like proof that he's done enough for now, that the world can spin without him for a while, that the machinery of compassion can run on its own momentum until he's ready to start again. There's an almost cinematic stillness to that moment. The empty store, the dim lights, Larry sitting alone behind the counter. No music, no dialogue, just the slow exhale of a man who has finally allowed himself to stop. It's not happiness exactly. It's something quieter, something truer. When he finally stands to leave, he doesn't rush. The uniform hangs looser now. The name tag glints under the fading light. He takes one last look around, not to check for mistakes, but to acknowledge the space. It feels different when he isn't managing it. For the first time, it feels like a place he belongs to, not one he works for. He locks the door, steps outside, and the night greets him with the same indifference it always has. The streets of Elmore glow faintly under the streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, he can hear laughter, gumballs maybe. Life continues, the world turns, and for once, Larry doesn't feel responsible for it. He just walks quietly through the town he's spent his life holding together. The silence follows him, but it's gentle now, not a void, but a companion. The silence after service is where Larry finally becomes whole again. Not because he's found answers, but because he's stopped asking questions. He understands now that the world doesn't owe him recognition, and he doesn't owe it endless motion. Service was never the point. Stillness was. To find peace not in applause or perfection, but in the quiet that follows both. And in that quiet, Larry Needlemeyer, the everyman, the worker, the ghost in Elmore's machine, finally feels human. Every town, every system, every world runs on some kind of economy. Money, time, attention, emotion, they all trade in the same invisible currency, worth. In Elmore, the logic of value is both absurd and painfully accurate. People measure themselves in laughter, drama, chaos, or spectacle. Nicole earns worth through control, Gumball through creativity, Darwin through kindness. But Larry Needlemeyer, he earns his through function. He works, and therefore he is. At least, that's what the world tells him. Larry's worth, in Elmore's unspoken hierarchy, is directly tied to his utility. He's the machine operator, the server, the clerk, the one who keeps everything smooth enough for everyone else to live loudly. He doesn't get applause, only expectation. The economy of Elmore, like our own, depends on people like him. The invisible workforce that keeps the absurdity from imploding. But there's a cruelty buried in that system. A quiet violence disguised as normality. When your existence is defined by your usefulness, rest becomes rebellion. Larry doesn't talk about it because he's not supposed to. The rules of the invisible economy are simple. Don't stop, don't question, and don't ask what any of it means. His service is expected, his fatigue ignored, his kindness commodified. Even his patience becomes a product, the customer service smile, the illusion of infinite tolerance. He wears it not as expression, but as armor. And yet, every economy collapses under its own weight eventually. There's a day, maybe no different from any other, when Larry begins to sense the imbalance. It starts with something small, a customer shouting about a delay, a child spilling a drink and laughing instead of apologizing. Nothing new, but this time, the air feels heavier. Each interaction drains him more than usual, as if every exchange were a silent transaction of his soul. He gives calm, he receives complaint. He gives order, he receives chaos. The imbalance grows until the act of existing feels like a debt he can't repay. That's the paradox of value in service. The more he gives, the less he's seen. The more reliable he becomes, the more invisible he is. His worth is measured only in absence. No one notices him unless he fails. When everything runs perfectly, he disappears entirely. His perfection erases his presence. And yet, Elmore's absurdity keeps demanding more. It's a world where logic breaks, but expectation doesn't. Larry's existence becomes a ledger, credits of labor, debits of rest. The math never balances. Even when he quits, even when he stops the machinery, the world doesn't collapse out of moral realization. It collapses because it lost its convenience. And when he returns, it isn't gratitude that greets him. It's relief. The kind that says, good. The world works again. Not good, you're back. But what makes Larry remarkable is that he eventually stops waiting for acknowledgement. He learns that the world's economy of value is broken, not because it fails him specifically, but because it was never designed to recognize quiet worth. It rewards noise, novelty, spectacle. It doesn't understand endurance. It doesn't know how to price kindness. So he begins to redefine the economy in his own terms. He starts noticing the smaller exchanges, the ones that don't fit inside the market of recognition. The moment someone softens their tone because he doesn't respond with anger. The way a child watches him fix something and learns, wordlessly, that patience can mend what temper breaks. The quiet gratitude of a world that keeps running, even if it forgets to say thank you. These are his new transactions, unrecorded, unacknowledged, but real. In that sense, Larry becomes a philosopher of value without ever meaning to be one. He begins to understand that worth cannot be measured in applause, income, or even rest. True worth is cyclical, a current of care that passes through people without needing to be owned. His actions ripple outward in ways he'll never see, but that doesn't make them meaningless. It makes them eternal. The economy of existence, he realizes, isn't about earning, it's about circulation. Everything he gives returns in invisible forms. The functioning world, the laughter of others, the simple continuation of life. His labor becomes the unseen foundation of collective joy. And though no one credits him, the universe does, in its quiet way. But even philosophy has its price. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity brings ache. Larry knows now that the world will never be fair, that it will always take more than it gives. Yet he also understands that to stop giving would mean joining the very indifference he resents. So he gives differently. He no longer gives to be valued. He gives because he values. That shift from being measured to measuring changes everything. There's a scene that plays out countless times across his many jobs. Someone complains, someone yells, someone forgets he's human. He doesn't argue anymore. Instead, he listens. Not to the words, they don't matter, but to the fear beneath them. People lash out, he realizes, not because they're cruel, but because they're desperate to matter. The entire world suffers from the same sickness, the terror of being worthless. Larry's patience becomes antidote, not to fix the system, but to soften its symptoms. In that way, he becomes something larger than Elmore's worker. He becomes its quiet moral economy, the counterbalance to its absurd excess. For every outburst, he offers calm. For every absurd demand, he offers acceptance. His worth stops being a product and becomes a principle. Still, there are nights when he feels the weight of the imbalance too heavily. When he counts the hours, the tasks, the unacknowledged kindnesses, and wonders if any of it adds up. The silence. After service returns, but now it carries a different voice. One that whispers questions about fairness, meaning, and futility. He doesn't answer. He just breathes through it, trusting that some equations can't be solved, only lived. The beauty of Larry's evolution is that he doesn't transcend the world. He stays in it. He continues to work, to endure, to give. But now, he does it with awareness. He understands that even in a broken economy, compassion still holds currency. It just doesn't trade in recognition. It trades in resonance. Every act of decency, no matter how invisible, resonates somewhere, with someone. Maybe that's enough. And so, the man who once defined himself by his function now defines himself by his quiet impact. He no longer measures his worth by how many jobs he holds, but by how gently he holds them. Every act becomes deliberate, sacred even. He wipes the counter not to clean it, but to honor the space. He says, "Have a nice day," not because the script requires it, but because the world could use one more genuine wish. The economy of existence is not about balance. It's about belief. The belief that giving still matters, even when no one's keeping score. Larry has stopped trying to earn his place in the world. He simply occupies it, fully, faithfully. That's his wealth. Presence without pretense. When he walks home, the lights of Elmore glow like coins scattered across a dark sea. He passes the stores he's worked in, the streets he's cleaned, the lives he's touched unknowingly. Every light is a reminder of his invisible work, of the unseen exchange between his effort and the world's continuity. He smiles faintly. The night owes him nothing, and somehow that feels right. Because maybe existence isn't a transaction at all. Maybe it's a circulation of care, endless, imperfect, and free. And maybe in the quietest corners of the universe, value isn't measured by who notices you, but by what stays standing when you're gone. Larry doesn't need to be thanked anymore. The world running, absurd, flawed, alive is thanks enough. There's a difference between exhaustion and emptiness. Exhaustion is heavy. It anchors you to the world, but emptiness is light. It lifts you just high enough to see how far you've drifted from meaning. Larry Needlemeyer has known exhaustion all his life, but emptiness. That's something new. It comes not from overwork, but from the slow realization that the work might not mean anything at all. He still shows up, still moves through the motions. Clock in, serve, apologize, repeat. The routine's a muscle memory now, as natural as breathing. But somewhere between the "welcome to Joyful Burger" and the "have a nice day," a quiet voice begins to whisper, "Why?" At first, he tries to ignore it. Meaning isn't something you question when you're busy keeping the world from collapsing. It's a luxury for people who have time to stop. But once the question appears, it doesn't leave. It lingers in the background like the hum of a refrigerator, faint but relentless. Why clean what will be dirty again tomorrow? Why fix what will break again next week? Why hold together a world that doesn't seem to notice it's falling apart? The collapse of meaning never happens in a single moment. It unfolds slowly, like a building sinking into soft ground. The structure still stands, but its foundation erodes quietly beneath it. Larry keeps working because work is what he knows. But the sense of purpose that once accompanied his actions begins to fade. His motions stay the same, but his reasons disappear. It's a strange kind of disorientation, the kind that doesn't show on the outside. To everyone else, he looks exactly the same, reliable, polite, composed, but internally something fundamental is unraveling. Every task feels like an echo of itself, a hollow version of what it used to be. The more he tries to hold on to meaning, the more it slips through his fingers. There's a moment one night, one of those long, silent nights when the world seems to forget itself, when he finds himself staring at the ceiling of the convenience store. The lights buzz faintly, the clock ticks too loudly, and he feels a strange detachment, as if he's watching his own body from outside. He sees himself move, speak, serve, and it looks like someone else. For the first time, he realizes that the machine doesn't need belief to function. It just needs motion. Meaning, he realizes, was never part of the design. That thought should terrify him. It doesn't. It just numbs him. Because what do you do when you realize that your entire life's rhythm doesn't depend on you understanding it, only on you continuing it? He thinks about quitting again. But quitting doesn't erase meaninglessness. It just relocates it. The absence of work is no more fulfilling than the work itself. The collapse of meaning is not a failure of purpose. It's a failure of connection. The thread that once tied his effort to the world has snapped. He doesn't know how to tie it back. This is where Larry becomes more than a character. He becomes a question. A mirror held up to the absurdity of existence itself. Because what he's feeling, that hollow ache beneath the repetition, isn't unique to him. It's the echo of a universal truth. That meaning, once taken for granted, is the first thing to vanish when life becomes pure function. And yet, there's something almost freeing about the collapse. When meaning dissolves, so does expectation. The rules of the invisible economy, the shoulds and musts that governed his life, lose their hold. He starts to move differently, slower, more deliberate. He still does the job, but not because he believes in it. He does it to see what happens when you strip meaning away and leave only motion. What he discovers surprises him. Without the weight of meaning, his actions start to feel cleaner, almost meditative. When he wipes a counter, it's not too clean, it's just wiping. When he greets a customer, it's not to please, it's just speaking. When he breathes, it's not to continue, it's just being. The collapse of meaning, paradoxically, reveals something purer beneath. A simplicity he's never known. He realizes that most of his suffering came not from the work itself, but from what he wanted it to represent. He wanted his effort to matter, to build something lasting, to prove that order had value. But the truth is, everything in Elmore resets eventually. Continuity is an illusion. The system forgets what it owes him as soon as it starts working again. And yet, maybe that's not tragic. Maybe it's honest. Maybe the purpose of a task isn't to last, but to exist fully in the moment it's done. Larry begins to live like that. Moment to moment. Gesture to gesture. Not as a rejection of meaning, but as an acceptance of its impermanence. The counter doesn't stay clean, the shelves don't stay stocked, but for the instant that they are, the world makes sense. It's fleeting, but real. Maybe that's enough. It's a kind of spiritual detachment. Not apathy, but surrender. A quiet acceptance that meaning is not something you hold. It's something that passes through you, like breath. When he stops trying to control it, He finds it everywhere. In the hum of the machines, in the rhythm of the work, even in the absurd requests of the customers. The collapse of meaning turns out not to be an end, but a doorway. But doors don't open without loss. There are still nights when the emptiness creeps back in. The sense that everything is cyclical, replaceable, and endlessly absurd. When he feels that, he doesn't fight it anymore. He lets it settle beside him, like a familiar ghost. Meaninglessness, he realizes, is not the opposite of meaning. It's the space that makes meaning possible. Without it, we'd never notice the moments that do matter. Larry's story becomes the quiet, embodiment of absurdist philosophy. He doesn't rebel with anger or despair, he rebels with continuation. By continuing to serve, to function, to exist in a world that forgets him, he performs the ultimate act of defiance. He keeps meaning alive by refusing to demand permanence from it. His life becomes a practice, not of belief, but of awareness. This is what separates him from the chaos of Elmore. The others react. Larry reflects. They search for meaning in excitement, in conflict, in spectacle. Larry finds it in routine, in silence, in the spaces between. His collapse doesn't destroy him. It strips him bare. And in that nakedness, he finds something truer than comfort, peace, without reason. There's a scene that could exist, even if it never does, of Larry standing outside his store after closing, staring at the neon sign as it flickers in the dark. The open light buzzes softly, refusing to die. He watches it pulse, irregular and alive, and something about it feels familiar. The world doesn't stop being absurd. It doesn't become clearer, but it keeps shining, however dimly, and so does he. Meaning, he realizes, doesn't collapse because it was never a structure to begin with. It was a current, and he's been swimming in it all along. The collapse was only his awakening to that truth. There's a strange kind of beauty in rebuilding something that was never truly broken, only misunderstood. That's where Larry Needlemeyer finds himself now. After the collapse of meaning, after the silence, after the long ache of existing without reason, something begins to move inside him again. Not a grand revelation or a sudden joy, just a pulse. Soft, patient, steady. The sound of life continuing, quietly, beneath the ruins of purpose. It begins, as all rebirths do, in the smallest of moments. A morning shift at the store, the sun just rising, painting the floor with light through the front windows, the smell of coffee, the mechanical hum of the world waking up. Larry stands behind the counter, same as always, but something feels different. For the first time in a long while, the repetition doesn't feel empty. It feels alive. He picks up the scanner, hears the faint beep as he passes items over it. He watches the rhythm of it. Beep, swipe, click. It's a sound he's heard 1,000 times, but today it lands differently. It's not noise anymore. It's music. The song of the ordinary. The simple, rhythmic proof that the world is still spinning. The rebirth of the ordinary isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive like a miracle. It creeps in through the cracks of habit, through the gestures so familiar they stop meaning anything, until suddenly they mean everything. For Larry, it happens when he realizes he doesn't need meaning to feel connection. All he needs is attention. Not to think about life, but to notice it. The world around him hasn't changed. Elmore is still absurd, chaotic, endlessly self-destructing. But something in the way he looks at it has softened. The things that used to irritate him, Gumbel's antics, Richard's carelessness, the town's perpetual dysfunction, now appear almost beautiful in their fragility. Everyone's trying, he realizes. Even the chaos is an effort to live. Larry's rebirth isn't about finding new purpose. It's about seeing the old one differently. The same actions that once felt mechanical now feel sacred. The same monotony that once crushed him now gives him rhythm. When he wipes a counter, he feels the texture of the cloth against the surface. When he rings up a customer, he looks them in the eyes, not as a transaction, but as a brief crossing of lives. He begins to see that the world's value isn't in what it produces, but in what it witnesses. The ordinary, it turns out, never died. It just needed someone to see it again. Rebirth doesn't come without resistance. There are still days when the fatigue returns, when the weight of repetition feels unbearable, but Larry no longer sees those days as failures. He sees them as weather, temporary, shifting, inevitable. Meaning isn't a constant. It's a climate. It changes. It rains. It clears. What matters is learning how to stand in it without losing warmth. In this new phase of his life, Larry becomes something like a monk of the mundane. His days are rituals, sweeping floors, stacking boxes, fixing machines. Every act is a prayer, not to a god, but to continuity itself. Each motion reaffirms that existence, however absurd, still deserves care. The world will always fall apart, and he will always help put it back together. That's not futility anymore. That's devotion. He finds moments of quiet transcendence in the simplest places. The reflection of light on a clean window, the way dust settles in the air after closing, the gentle buzz of a vending machine. These details, once invisible, now hold entire worlds. They remind him that beauty doesn't need grandeur, it needs attention. The ordinary is not empty, it's infinite. It only hides when we stop looking. There's a scene that could exist. Somewhere between shifts, Larry sitting outside the store on his break, coffee in hand, watching the cars pass. He's not thinking about anything profound. He's not analyzing or comparing. He's just watching. A breeze moves through the trees, and for a brief moment, time feels suspended. He feels small, but not insignificant. Just part of something larger, something moving, something alive. That's the heart of rebirth, when insignificance stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like peace. Larry begins to notice that his relationships change too. Not dramatically, no grand reconciliations or speeches, but quietly, through presence. When Gumball complains or causes chaos, Larry doesn't snap. He listens, not out of obligation, but curiosity. When Nicole rushes through the store, overworked and focused, Larry slows down enough to smile at her. Not because he expects kindness back, but because he sees her exhaustion and recognizes it. He's lived it. Compassion, once mechanical, becomes genuine again. This is the paradox of the rebirth of the ordinary. The less you demand from life, the more it gives you. By releasing his grip on purpose, Larry creates space for wonder. Small wonders, fleeting ones. The way the sunlight hits the glass jars. The hum of a freezer blending with the sound of laughter outside. The feeling of a perfectly balanced moment that no one else will ever notice. They're not meaningful because they last. They're meaningful because he sees them. The collapse of meaning taught Larry that nothing is permanent. The rebirth teaches him that impermanence is not the enemy. It's the essence of life. Everything worth loving will eventually fade, and that's precisely why it's worth loving. To clean a counter knowing it will get dirty again is not futility, it's faith. To serve a world that will forget you is not failure, it's grace. This is the quiet enlightenment Larry reaches. Not transcendence, but tenderness. A realization that the ordinary is not the opposite of sacred, but its most faithful expression. The everyday, repeated endlessly, becomes a kind of prayer to existence itself. Each task is a syllable in a conversation between him and the universe, a reminder that even absurdity deserves devotion. He starts to feel something unfamiliar. Gratitude. Not for recognition or success, but for the chance to do. To wake up, to work, to see, to breathe. Gratitude for the rhythm that once imprisoned him and now keeps him steady. The same cycles that once felt meaningless now feel like music. A song he's finally learned how to hear. There's a small, quiet scene that captures this perfectly. It's closing time again. The store is empty. Larry finishes wiping the last counter, turns off the lights, and stands by the door. The silence arrives, same as always. But this time, it doesn't feel hollow. It feels full, like a held breath. He smiles to himself, faintly, and says aloud to no one, "Good work today." No one hears it, but it doesn't matter. For the first time, he's not saying it for anyone else. He's saying it to himself. That's the rebirth. Not in circumstance, but in perception. Nothing around him has changed, yet everything feels new because he finally allows himself to belong to it. The store isn't a cage anymore, it's a world. The repetition isn't punishment, it's pattern. The silence isn't absence, it's peace. Larry realizes that perhaps meaning was never meant to be found in progress or achievement. But in return, in coming back to the same place and seeing it differently each time, the universe doesn't move forward. It circles. The sun rises, the store opens, people laugh, people leave, and he remains. Not as the one who must hold it all together, but as the one who finally understands its rhythm. The rebirth of the ordinary doesn't end with triumph. It ends with acceptance. Larry still works too much, still gets tired, still sighs when things go wrong. But beneath every sigh, there's softness now. The quiet knowledge that life was never supposed to be perfect. It was only supposed to be lived. And Larry, at long last, is living. When he walks home, the streetlights hum in sync with his footsteps. The world feels familiar again, but not repetitive. It feels rhythmic, a heartbeat, and steady and alive. The night wind brushes past him, carrying with it the scent of distant dinners, laughter, and the faint music of Elmore's chaos. He smiles, knowing he'll face it all again tomorrow. But tomorrow doesn't scare him anymore, because tomorrow is not another repetition. It's another chance to begin again. Peace, Larry Needlemeyer learns, is not a destination. It's maintenance, delicate, ongoing, easily disturbed. It's the space between chaos and collapse, held together by the smallest act of awareness. And like everything else in Elmore, it doesn't stay still for long. After the quiet renewal of his ordinary days, Larry begins to feel something close to equilibrium. He works with rhythm, breathes without rush, accepts imperfection. But Elmore, ever the embodiment of entropy, doesn't let peace sit idle. The town is allergic to stillness. It thrives on noise, on motion, on things falling apart just so they can fall back together. Larry's newfound balance, so fragile and hard-won, exists within a world built to break it. The first cracks appear subtly, as they always do. A malfunctioning register, a spilled drink, a rush of customers all at once. Nothing catastrophic, just the daily entropy of existence. But each disruption tugs gently at the thread of calm he's woven. He feels his old instincts rise, the tension in his shoulders, the breath held too long, the quiet panic that order might slip away again. He takes a step back, breathes, remembers the silence that once frightened him, now turned friend. The lesson was never to eliminate chaos. It was to exist within it. So he lets the noise unfold. The mess spreads. Customers complain. The day goes on. And through it, Larry stays steady, not by resisting, but by adjusting. That's the fragility of balance. It's alive. It moves. It's not perfection held in place, but presence held through change. Still, some days, that presence falters. Because balance, no matter how practiced, is tiring. It requires vigilance, a constant awareness of self amid the swirl of absurdity. Larry notices how quickly peace can slip away the moment he forgets to protect it. One rude customer, one long shift, one small mistake, and suddenly he's right back on the edge of collapse. And yet, that edge, the place where calm meets chaos, is exactly where Larry learns the most. He begins to realize that peace was never meant to be permanent. If it were, it would grow stagnant. Its fragility is what makes it beautiful. The moments of serenity only hold meaning because they exist against a backdrop of noise. A silent store after a loud day, a clean counter after a rush, these are small victories. Not because they last, but because they don't. Each one is a moment of stillness earned through motion. The fragility of balance, then, becomes Larry's philosophy of survival. He stops chasing constancy and starts practicing flexibility. When something breaks, he fixes it. When it doesn't, he breathes. He learns to bend like light, not resisting the shape of the world, but moving through it. There's a quiet grace in that, the grace of someone who has learned that control is not the same as care. In his earlier life, Larry believed the world depended on him to stay steady. Now he understands that steadiness is not an obligation, but an art. You don't hold balance by force, you hold it by feeling. He notices this truth one day while changing a flat tire for a customer. The car wobbles slightly on the jack, and instinctively, he steadies it with one hand while adjusting the wrench with the other. The balance between pressure and release is delicate. Too tight, and the bolt snaps. Too loose, and the tire slips. In that moment, Larry feels something click inside him. The car isn't the only thing being balanced. So is he. The gesture becomes metaphor for life, for patience, for the art of holding tension without letting it break you. But balance has its costs. To maintain it, Larry must constantly return to awareness. And awareness, while sacred, is also exhausting. It requires him to notice everything. The small sounds of frustration, the patterns of his own breathing, the invisible tug of fatigue that builds with every day. Awareness keeps him from falling, but it also keeps him awake in ways that sleep never fully cures. Sometimes he envies those who live carelessly, who crash through life without noticing the cracks they leave behind. Gumbel's chaos, Richard's oblivion, even Nicole's righteous fury, they all have something he doesn't. Release. Larry's peace comes with the price of perpetual vigilance. He doesn't get to lose control because he knows too well what happens when he does. There's a scene that plays quietly in the rhythm of his days. Larry standing in a store that's just erupted into nonsense. A register smoking, children laughing too loudly, a soda fountain overflowing. Everyone's shouting, moving, reacting. Larry simply stands there, breathing through it, eyes half closed. For a moment, it looks like resignation, but it's not. It's recognition. This is what the world is: loud, unpredictable, unfixable, and somehow still worth serving. He doesn't silence the noise anymore. He harmonizes with it. But balance isn't just external, it's internal too. The balance between his compassion and his self-preservation. He still gives, still helps, still absorbs the chaos of others, but he's learned to hold a little back for himself. That's the hardest part for someone like Larry, realizing that to stay kind, he must also stay intact. So he practices small acts of self-kindness. A longer break, a cup of coffee enjoyed without multitasking, a refusal to apologize for things that aren't his fault. They're small gestures, invisible to anyone else, but monumental to him. They're not rebellion, they're balance made visible. Still, he slips sometimes. Everyone does. There are days when the old exhaustion wins, when the rhythm of balance falters and the weight of the world tips too far. On those days, he lets himself fall. Not completely, but enough. Enough to rest. Enough to admit that even equilibrium needs gravity. And every time he rises again, the balance returns softer, more flexible, less afraid of breaking. He realizes now that peace was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be practiced. Like breathing, like service, like existence itself. Always ongoing, always unfinished. The world doesn't need him to be unshakable. It just needs him to keep showing up, even when he trembles. In that understanding, Larry becomes something different from who he was before. He's not the overworked martyr holding the world together anymore. He's not the hollow machine of function. He's not even the quiet philosopher of collapse. He's simply human, flawed, present, aware. A man walking the thin line between chaos and calm, learning to love the wobble of it. There's a moment late at night when he steps outside after closing. The air is still. The town glows faintly under a half moon. Somewhere in the distance he can hear laughter, a car horn, a door closing. The world feels uneven, imperfect, and utterly alive. He breathes in, feels the imbalance of it all, and smiles. The world doesn't need to be steady. It just needs to keep moving. That's balance. Not symmetry, but motion that never stops. Larry's life, once a pendulum swinging between chaos and collapse, becomes a quiet dance instead. The mistakes, the noise, the fatigue, they're not interruptions anymore. They're part of the choreography. And if he stumbles, he doesn't curse the fall. He simply finds the rhythm again. The fragility of balance is not its weakness, it's its truth. It reminds him that everything good is temporary, everything peaceful is earned, and everything alive is in motion. When he closes the store, when the silence comes, when the lights dim, Larry doesn't guard the calm anymore. He lets it pass through him, as everything does. The peace he feels now isn't something he owns, it's something he shares. The world breathes in chaos, he breathes out calm. Together they stay alive, and so the man who once carried the weight of order now carries its rhythm. He no longer tries to keep the world from falling apart, he simply learns how to fall with it, gracefully. That's balance, and that's enough. Perfection doesn't die when you outgrow it. It lingers. It stays in the corners of the mind, whispering reminders of what things should be, even after you've learned that should is a wound disguised as guidance. Larry Needlemeyer thought he'd left that ghost behind, thought he'd buried it somewhere between the chaos and the calm. But perfection is stubborn. It waits. It doesn't haunt loudly. It doesn't scream. It sighs. A soft, constant sound at the edge of thought. When the register jams, when a shelf is slightly uneven, when a customer frowns for a reason that isn't even his, that's when the ghost stirs. It's not anger that rises in him, not anymore. It's disappointment, quiet and familiar. The whisper says, if you were better, this wouldn't have happened. That's the cruelty of perfection. It promises peace but breeds anxiety. It hides behind the illusion of improvement, of control, of wanting things to be right. But beneath that illusion lies fear, the fear of being blamed, of being seen as inadequate, of losing the fragile approval the world gives in crumbs. Larry knows this fear intimately. It's the invisible motor that drove him for years. The reason he worked every job, smiled through exhaustion, apologized for things that weren't his fault. Perfection was never about excellence. It was about survival. In a world that punishes mistakes, perfection becomes armor. And once you learn to live inside that armor, taking it off feels like standing naked in a storm. Even now, after everything, after awareness, after collapse, after renewal, the ghost still finds ways to touch him. When the balance wobbles, it whispers that peace is failure. When he rests too long, it tells him he's lazy. When he lets a small imperfection go, it calls him careless. The voice sounds like reason, but it's really memory. The echo of every time the world equated his worth with his precision. Perfection, Larry realizes, isn't a standard. It's a scar. He begins to see how deeply it's carved into him. The way he still triple checks the locks at closing, even when he knows they're secure. The way he feels an ache of guilt when he sits down during a slow shift. The way he still apologizes before speaking, as if existing requires justification. These are the fingerprints of the ghost. Subtle, habitual, invisible to anyone but him. But this time, instead of fighting it, Larry decides to listen. Not to obey, but to understand. He lets the ghost speak. It tells him of fear. Fear of disorder, fear of being unnecessary, fear of letting the world down. It tells him of the time he quit and everything fell apart. How that moment etched itself into his bones as proof that imperfection causes collapse. And as he listens, something shifts. He realizes that the ghost isn't evil. It's protective. It's the part of him that believed the only way to be safe was to be perfect. It's not trying to destroy him. It's trying to keep him from pain. That realization softens him. For the first time, he doesn't resent the ghost. He thanks it. He tells it silently that it can rest now. The world won't end if he breathes wrong. The shelves can lean. The store can be messy. The sky won't fall if he forgets to smile. Perfection loosens its grip. Not because it's defeated, but because it's finally seen. You can't exercise what you don't acknowledge. There's a moment, one that feels ordinary but isn't, when this understanding becomes real. Larry's at work, midway through a lunch rush. Orders are stacking, machines are beeping, customers are impatient. It's the kind of scene that used to make him spiral into quiet panic. But this time, something happens. He drops a cup, it shatters, and instead of rushing to fix it, he pauses. The sound rings out, sharp, brief, human. He looks at the mess, and for the first time in his life, he smiles. Not because it's funny, because it's true. The world is allowed to break. He kneels, sweeps up the shards, throws them away. No shame, no story, just motion. The ghost whispers, "You could have avoided that." And Larry just nods. "I know," he says softly. "And it's okay." It's not indifference, it's forgiveness. That's the day Larry begins to feel lighter. Not happier exactly, but freer. The ghost still visits. Perfection never vanishes entirely. But now it feels smaller, quieter, easier to carry. It becomes like a memory of someone he once loved, but no longer needs. He doesn't silence it. He coexists with it. Perfection had once made Larry into something mechanical, flawless, efficient, invisible. Now, imperfection makes him human again. The mistakes, the messes, the small inefficiencies, they don't threaten his worth anymore. They affirm it. They remind him that to err is to belong to the world, not stand above it. He starts to see imperfection everywhere, not as flaw, but as texture. The slight flicker in a neon sign, the uneven hum of a refrigerator, the mismatched tiles on the store floor. These aren't defects. They're proof that the world is alive. Perfect things are sterile. Broken things breathe. The ghost of perfection still lingers. But now Larry sees it as a teacher, rather than a tyrant. It taught him discipline, attention, devotion, all the tools he still uses, now freed from fear. The key was never to destroy perfection, but to unchain it from shame. When perfection becomes choice instead of compulsion, it transforms into art. There's a quiet poetry in watching Larry work now. He still moves with precision, but his gestures have loosened. His perfection is no longer rigid. It's fluid, like jazz. A dance with error rather than a battle against it. He still tries to do things well, but he no longer believes doing them poorly would make him less. His worth, he's learned, was never conditional. Perfection, he realizes, was never the opposite of failure. It was the fear of being seen while failing. Once he let himself be seen, the fear vanished. There's an image that stays with him. The reflection of himself in a slightly dirty store window. He could clean it, but he doesn't. He watches his faint, smudged silhouette instead. It's imperfect, distorted by fingerprints and dust. But it's real. More real than any spotless surface could be. He smiles. For the first time, the reflection doesn't look tired. It looks alive. In the end, the ghost doesn't disappear. It doesn't need to. It becomes part of him, a quiet echo reminding him not to chase flawlessness, but to love the flaws that make him whole. Perfection was the cage, imperfection is the key. And so, Larry continues. Not perfect, not broken, but balanced. The world still collapses sometimes, and he still catches it when he can. But he no longer believes that everything depends on him holding it steady. He's learned that beauty exists even in the collapse, especially in the collapse, because what's more perfect than imperfection embraced? That's the final paradox the ghost leaves him with. And this time, Larry doesn't try to solve it. He just laughs softly, sweeps the floor, and lets the moment be exactly what it is. Flawed, fleeting, alive. At the end of everything, after the shifts, the noise, the laughter, the failures, the endless unfolding of days, Larry Needlemeyer is still here. Still standing behind a counter, still serving a world that never quite remembers his name, still breathing in the rhythm of existence that hums like machinery under dim lights, but somewhere between the first, "Can I help you?" and the 1000th, something has changed. He's no longer searching for meaning. He's living it. The philosophy of Larry isn't written in words or carved into stone. It's written in motion, in the repetition of small kindnesses, in the quiet endurance of fatigue, in the choice to keep participating in a world that makes no promises. It's not about answers. It's about persistence. Not about order. About acceptance. If Darwin's philosophy is empathy and Nicole's is strength, then Larry's is continuity. The soft insistence that life keeps moving, and that moving itself is sacred. His story has no climax, no victory, no revelation. It doesn't need one. The miracle of Larry's life is that it exists at all, that it continues without spectacle, that it sustains the unremarkable. He's not the hero of Elmore's chaos. He's its pulse. the quiet, unacknowledged rhythm that keeps absurdity from collapsing into nothing. He wakes up each morning before the sun, ties his apron, and steps into the day. The same streets, the same faces, the same absurd patterns looping over and over again. But the sameness doesn't suffocate him anymore. It steadies him. The world repeats because repetition is its way of surviving itself. The cycles are not punishment, they're continuation. And continuation, Larry now understands, is the truest form of hope. Hope doesn't announce itself with trumpets or light. It lives quietly inside motion, the way a clock keeps ticking even when no one looks. The way a man keeps showing up even when no one thanks him. Larry's hope is mechanical and holy all at once. It doesn't ask for reward, it only asks for endurance. In his calm, he's become something more than the town's worker. He's its reflection, its conscience. The way he moves through absurdity teaches Elmore what it means to care even when nothing makes sense. Gumball's chaos, Richard's laziness, Nicole's anger, all of them orbit the same truth Larry has learned. That compassion isn't built on control. It's built on surrender. The world doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be tended. Larry tends, always has, always will. There's a small moment, one of those scenes that never makes it into any episode, that captures him perfectly. It's late evening, and the streets of Elmore are almost empty. The sun is bleeding into orange, the air humming with that quiet melancholy that only exists between day and night. Larry stands outside one of the stores, it doesn't matter which one, and watches the sky reflect in the windows. He thinks about nothing in particular. Maybe about how the color of the clouds looks like spilled coffee. Maybe about how peaceful everything feels when no one's demanding anything. And in that silence, something softens inside him. He realizes that for the first time, he doesn't feel separate from the world he serves. He is the world, as much a part of it as the air or the light. He's not outside it trying to fix it. He's within it, participating in its fragile beauty. That's the heart of his philosophy. Participation without possession. To love the world without owning it. To fix what you can without needing to control it. To serve not because you must, but because it feels like belonging. Larry's philosophy could be mistaken for resignation by someone who hasn't lived long enough to understand that surrender and peace are not the same thing. Surrender is defeat. Peace is acceptance. He hasn't given up on life. He's stopped arguing with it. He's learned that the world doesn't listen to force, only to rhythm. And he's learned to live in rhythm. There's no enlightenment in Larry's world, only awareness. Awareness that perfection was a mirage, that balance is a dance, that kindness is maintenance, and that love is the quiet act of showing up. Awareness that meaning is not something found in the grand or the final, but in the continuation of small gestures. The philosophy of Larry is built on paradoxes. To care without control, to serve without surrender, to be tired and still be kind, to see absurdity clearly and still choose to participate in it. He understands now that existence isn't about escaping the cycle, but about seeing it clearly enough to walk within it gracefully. The same absurd repetition that once broke him now sustains him. He no longer sees his jobs as endless burdens, but as endless opportunities to connect, to witness, to create small moments of stillness in the storm of Elmore's chaos. When he hands someone change, he feels the weight of the coins, the brief contact of hands. When he cleans the counter, he notices the reflection of the ceiling lights ripple like water. When he hears the door chime, he listens not for interruption, but for continuity, the sound of life moving through the threshold. It's not transcendence, it's attentiveness. Larry's philosophy doesn't promise happiness, it promises presence, and presence, he's learned, is more enduring than happiness. Happiness fades when the joke ends. Presence remains even when the world forgets to laugh. He's aware now that Elmore will never change. It will always loop, always forget, always return to absurdity. But that's not tragedy anymore. It's design. The world resets not to erase progress, but to preserve possibility. Every repetition is a chance to live differently, to serve, to rest, to forgive, to notice. Meaning isn't in what changes. It's in what you bring to what doesn't. And so Larry's legacy isn't something the town will ever talk about. It's something it feels. The quiet reliability of its rhythm. The way the lights always turn on, the doors always open, the laughter always resumes. All of it held together invisibly by a man who once mistook perfection for purpose and found peace instead. There's a certain holiness in the way he moves now. Not sacred in the religious sense, sacred in the way ordinary things become when you finally see them clearly. The steam rising from a cup of coffee, the sound of footsteps on linoleum, the stillness before morning. Larry doesn't pray anymore. He participates. Every breath is its own amen. He has learned at last that being good isn't about fixing everything. It's about keeping things gentle while they fall apart. That's the wisdom Elmore never notices, but always benefits from. That maintenance, in the grandest sense, is love. Love is not just feeling, it's caretaking. It's showing up for a world that keeps breaking and saying, I'll hold this together a little longer. That's what Larry does. Every day, quietly, patiently, without applause. And that is the essence of his philosophy. To be ordinary, and to let ordinary things matter again. To care in small ways when the world forgets how. To hold life not as a task, but as a tender, temporary thing. When the night comes, he doesn't think about the day ahead. He doesn't count the hours left or the tasks undone. He just sits for a while, in the quiet. The silence that once haunted him now feels like home. He closes his eyes and listens to the hum of the machines, the faint breathing of the town. It's not perfect, it's not peaceful, but it's real. He smiles, that small, exhausted, honest smile that belongs only to those who've stopped chasing and started being. Tomorrow will come, the store will open, the absurdity will resume, and Larry will be there, as he always is, not because he has to, but because the world, in all its flawed beauty, is worth returning to. The philosophy of Larry is simple. Keep showing up, keep breathing, keep the lights on. That's all. And somehow, it's everything.